China sending its second highest official as a representative on the international stage. Premier Li Qiang will be addressing world leaders at the UN General Assembly in the hours ahead. He's speaking in place of President Xi Jinping, who skipped this year's summit. Before the speech, Mr. Li had hosted a meeting on the Global Development Initiative. He repeated China's commitment to upholding a multilateral trading system, calling for countries to jointly build balanced and inclusive partnerships. And more, Toni Waterman is reporting for CNA outside the UN headquarters in New York. Toni, Li Qiang speaking in the next few hours. This is 3 days after the US president made his address at the United Nations. Will we be expecting a very different kind of speech?
We're expecting this speech to be the exact opposite of what President Trump delivered just a couple of days ago. Premier Li is expected to walk some pretty well-trodden territory for the Chinese, particularly when it comes to things like climate change. Just the other day, President Xi Jinping, for the very first time, committed China to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 7 to 10% off its peak by 2035, and also build up its renewable capacity to help wean the country off of fossil fuels. And this is pretty much a rejection of President Trump's assertion this week that climate change is a con job, that carbon emissions are a hoax. So this is just one of the areas where the U.S. and China are now just really in stark comparison to one another. Another thing is going to be on multilateralism. We're expecting Premier Li to recommit China to globalism. Trump, during his speech, actually chastised the idea of multilateralism and the UN, saying that not only has the UN not been able to solve the world's problems, but it is, in fact, creating new ones. As the U.S. steps back from multilateral institutions like the United Nations, there's a void being left that China is very eager to fill. But experts that I have spoken to say that while China sees value in the United Nations, particularly around development programs, it does not want to become the financial guarantor to the World Organization. It is not going to step in to fill the financial gap that the U.S. is leaving behind, particularly as China itself is delaying its payment of dues to this organization. We can also expect that Premier Li is going to talk about trade as Beijing and Washington continue to negotiate a trade deal. And we expect he will also talk about greater empowerment and representation for countries in the global south and calling for UN reform.
Toni will be looking for some security and reassurance when China treads pretty much familiar ground, but possibly a more contentious speech also later today with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking at the United Nations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. After a week of Israel being told that it is carrying out genocide, that Benjamin Netanyahu was a war criminal, this growing support for an independent Palestinian state, it is now Israel's turn to speak. So we are expecting a rather defiant, contentious speak from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. On his way to New York, he told reporters that he is going to strongly condemn these countries that in the last couple of days have for the first time shown their support for an independent Palestinian state. This includes big Western powers and Israeli allies like France and Canada and the UK. So we're expecting a lot of conversation about that. He called it, when he was leaving, a shameful capitulation and a reward for terrorists. We're also expecting Benjamin Netanyahu to really plead Israel's case as to why it needs to continue this war so that it can obliterate Hamas. But certainly the calls for this war to end are growing louder. He is going to be visiting President Trump at the White House in Washington on Monday, where this is going to be a theme of the conversation. They are very close allies, but their priorities right now are starting to diverge. The president very much wants this war to come to an end. He has positioned himself as a global peacemaker, and this war dragging on goes against what President Trump is trying to portray himself as. So perhaps we could see some of that conversation taking place. Also, Trump saying yesterday that he is not going to allow Israel to annex the West Bank.
Well, thanks. Toni Waterman there reporting for CNA in New York.